one place I wanted to start with is how you got your start at Enlightened. So maybe tell us what your current role is, but I'd really like to know what your entry role is because I think that's an interesting part of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a weird story that most of my family didn't really agree with, to be honest. I'm currently the CEO. That was about 7 years after the start of my time at Enlightened Equipment. So I started back in 2016. Kind of a weird serendipitous kind of event unfolded. I was in the midst of a about 12-year nonprofit leadership career. I had worked for the Boy Scouts and La Crosse Gateway Area Council for about 7 years. And then I took a job as an executive director for a Big Brothers Big Sisters organization, and that served 12 counties in the area. And then my final stop in the nonprofit fundraiser world was a tech college here in Winona, Minnesota. So I was the foundation director there. And ultimately, like that was the fulfillment that I was getting from that role in the first 5 to 7 years was kind of drifting. And like as I started to make the switch into different organizations, I really felt like that was going to be the change I needed to kind of recharge my passion and drive for that profession. Each time it kind of left me lacking. I just wasn't really feeling like I had a purpose. The mission didn't connect with me as much as it did my 7 year run with Boy Scouts. Like I came from a Boy Scout organization. I'm an Eagle Scout. So like all of that really kind of helped to drive that first 7 years where the pain points and the problems of running a nonprofit, just the long, grueling hours, just the kind of the tedium of it all to kind of maintain it. I think that I had that internal passion because of my connection to the program, that I was able to kind of overcome those things. But as I switched into other realms that were, paper, great opportunities for me, and I'm involved in United Way, and I'm like really moving through the ranks of our community. I'm making all these connections. People are loving what the work that I'm doing inside. Like my soul is just kind of like slowly getting darker, and I just didn't have the love for it anymore. Um, so that's kind of what turned me into like a DIY gear maker. I was doing that kind of after hours. I was building up stuff for me personally at first. I was building hammocks and tarps, synthetic underquilts, backpacks, like just stuff that I wanted to have, that I just kind of wanted to make. I'm a hands-on kind of creative at my core. And it just resonated with me. The DIY gear kind of scene was really coming on with companies like, Through Hiker and, DIY Gear Supply and Ripstop by the Roll. And all of a sudden, I felt like I had these tools and access to things that I could make, cool stuff that I wanted. So that kind of started. I grabbed a Singer sewing machine for 18 bucks at a Goodwill. Started grabbing fabric, grabbing everything I could. I'm sketching things up on SketchUp and graph paper. And I'm pretty sure my family thought I was in some kind of like midlife crisis age at this point. But it kind of morphed into like all of a sudden I was making gear for like my friends that also were going on, big backpacking trips with me and things like that. I started to post things on Facebook, and that all of a sudden I kind of had this little tiny company called Driftless Gear. And I was basically just, contract things out. Somebody'd say they'd want a, 6 ounce Apex Velcro foot box bottom top quilt and a under quilt. And I would kind of source all the materials and let them choose some stuff. And I started to make this stuff, selling it to them for basically just kind of the cost to keep the thing going. I was having ripstop by the roll boxes on my porch every day to kind of refresh Climate Shield and nylons and cords and cord locks and all that kind of stuff. So it was a fun time. It was like my outlet, really, I think, to kind of just like escape from my day to day, honestly. Uh, it kind of morphed into a little bit of something more, to the point where I started to like talk more openly about it with my coworkers. I had kind of kept it like a little bit of a secret. I thought it was kind of weird, like I don't know. It just was kind of a different thing that really I didn't know anybody else that was doing it, especially guys. Um, so I started to bring a couple things into work as like people were asking me about it. And at the time, I was at Southeast Technical College. I worked in an office with the community ed organizer. And she's like looking at the quilt that I made, and she said, this is interesting. This is a lot like the gear that Enlightened Equipment makes. And I was like, yeah, it is. I'm basically like screen capturing, trying to like clone stuff from Enlightened Equipment at that time. And then the follow up was immediately like, well, how do you know about Enlightened Equipment? Like, how would you know about Enlightened Equipment? And she's like, well, they're in town. And I was like, what? Like, it was just like, it
Really?
blew
You had
my
no idea.
mind. I had no idea. I had no idea. I had been looking at their site for years, like looking at how they put on, line lock threes onto underquilts and like reverse engineering it with my mind. And I had zero idea that they were in this little tiny sewing shop in Winona on the East End in a hole in the wall. It was like an old Napa Auto Parts building. It was then like after that, it was a little fabric shop that they called the Cinderella Shop. No signs outside, no presence really in any of the community events or anything that I had tied into as a fundraiser. And so it literally just it blew my mind. I like left. I was kind of it had this very like shaking moment in my brain that I knew I had to like reach out to Enlightened Equipment, see like what's going on. Like if nothing else, I wanted to get a tour. I wanted to meet the owner. I just wanted to like see about it because I was just so curious about that space in general. And at that time, that would have been, you know, mid 2015. Enlightened Equipment was really just kind of starting to like take off on backpacking light forums. They had a decent web presence. They were really getting some traction, but it was early days, of the brand. So I I literally went home and I wrote an actual letter, typed it all up, boom, 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 boom. Hey, Tim, like I'm a fellow gear maker guy, and I just found out that you're in Winona, Minnesota, and I would like love to meet you and talk with you and just like pick your brain a little bit, get a tour of your facility. And I put it in an envelope and a stamp, and I sent it to the business, which like nobody does that stuff anymore. It's crazy that that's, 10 years ago. And it was just a thing to do. I sent it. I honestly didn't expect too much. I figured in my mind, like if I didn't hear back, I would like just stop in and like say hi at some point down the road. I included my email in it. And like probably a couple months went by. I just was busy with life. I had at that time I would had a 7-year-old daughter, busy career, busy life, just things were going on, just status quo. All of a sudden I got an email from Tim Marshall, and it was from Enlightened Equipment. And I was like, oh, yeah, the letter. So I open up the email, and it's Tim, and he's like, yo, dude, like, that's really cool that you're a fan of the brand and that you make gear. I really don't know any other guys that like make gear. I'd love to meet you and like, of course, give you a tour. So emailed him back, really excited. We lined up. I asked him if I could buy him a cup of coffee. He promptly told me he hates coffee, but he'd let me buy him an orange juice. So we planned to meet at a little coffee shop in town. I got there, sat there for an hour, no Tim. I was like, oh man, I got ghosted by Tim. So I drank my coffee. I went back to work. I got back. I was like, "Yo, missed you at the coffee shop." And he was like, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry, dude. We're in the middle of looking at another building. Like, I'm cramming people in here right now. Like, I got 12-week lead times on custom things. It's just like blowing up right now." He felt horrible about it, and he's like, "Can you just come over? Like, are you able to just leave work and like come on over right now?" He's like, "I'm at the office. I got a few minutes. I'd love to give you a tour and make up for it." So I couldn't that day, but I had another day like down the and later in the week that I could go. So I popped over, walked into this just chaos sphere where it was like, I don't know, maybe like 2,500 square feet with, I mean, you could barely walk through the place. I mean, there was like synthetic sewing stations down walls, sewing machines stacked in all over the place. They had like tore down walls in there. They had a little glass top cutting table inside of a closet. They had like 3 or 4 people in this wood paneled office with like, water stains all over the ceiling. And I was just like, I'm in love. I'm in love with this. Like it's everything I had hoped it would be. And he was like embarrassed of it. He didn't want to even like show it to me. And I'm like, dude, this is so cool. Like I love it to death. And kind of just like that, he was like, well, you should come work for me then. And I was like, well, it's not that easy at this point. I'm working in a super stable job, like making good money. I got union benefits. You got all those strings attached that life kind of just can kind of shift you around. Um, so a little bit of a back and forth kind of went along for a while. And in that process, I had told him that I was making gear and I was selling gear. And he's like, when you get done with this underquilt, top quilt that you're building for this guy that I was telling about, you should bring it in. Like I'd love to just check it out. I can give you some pointers. Um, and I was so surprised at how like open and kind of gracious he was with the knowledge that he had. Like at that point, he really didn't know me at all. Like I could have been, deep competition. I clearly wasn't. He knew that, but he was just so open with just what he knew and his like willingness to chat with me about it. I got done with the top quilt and under quilt that I had built for this guy. And before I shipped it out to him, I called him up and I said, hey, are you around? I got that thing done. And he's like, yeah, I am, but I'm not at the Cinderella shop anymore. I'm at this other building across town that we're trying to see if we can move into because we just need more space. So I ran over there. It's like a two-story building. It's like not really set up for manufacturing. It was like an old office building. And it was at that time, it was just him in an office and then the synthetic sewing department, which is kind of like very space occupying. You have big pinning tables, you got huge rolls of climate shield, all kinds of rolls of fabric. And they basically just couldn't fit that in the space they were in. So they kind of had two buildings going at the time. He looked at my thing, he made fun of it a little bit. He's like, yeah, you could have done this better. Your closing is, got some work to do. And he's like, I got a couple things to do. I'll tell you what, you should go over and talk to, his name was Taylor. You should go talk to Taylor. He's working on a top quilt right now. He'll show you how we close them. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah, just go over and tell Taylor I said it's okay. So I went over there and I just kind of shadowed this sewer as he showed me effectively like IP on how to build this top quilt, no strings attached, no anything. And I was like, man, that is like so elegant and it's so creative in terms of how he's doing it. I came back, I was like excited to chat with him a little bit. And he's like, so, what do we got to do? Like I got a gal, Jenny, that's gonna start up our R&D department because we basically right at that time they had like the Revelation sleeping quilt and they had an Enigma, the closed box sleeping quilt that kind of had some problems in the design. And they had some insulated accessories like little booties and a hood. But he wanted to expand. He had a lot of grandiose ideas and dreams about where this thing was going to go that all felt wildly unrealistic to me. But it was, I think, like probably one of the first times in a long time that I'd been super excited about like the idea of a job. I was like, wow, this guy is wild. It's just like he's so it really just caught my attention. And so I said, yeah, I mean, that sounds awesome, but I got all this life stuff. I just don't know. And he's like, well, I see what you're doing right now. Like you obviously got leadership chops. You're doing all this stuff. Like I'm building a thing that's going to require leaders. I don't know where it's going to go and I can't make any promises, but if you can come in and sew for a while and like, work with the team and like kind of figure it out. He's like, I got to think that there's a lot of options for you down the road. So I went home. I talked to my wife about it. Of course, I'm really excited. She's excited for me because she can see me being excited about a job again. And I kind of kept talking about it. I kept bringing it up and she was like, you got to kind of do this. You got to pursue this. Like the money didn't matter. Like she had a pretty stable job at the time. We could kind of make it work with just hers plus like, knowing I'd probably take some kind of big pay cut or something. Um, and I bounced it off a ton of other people in my life, people that mattered a lot to me, but they were, they were hesitant to like green light that for me. They were kind of like, man, like you've been doing this, you're doing so good. Like it seems kind of like such a knee jerk reaction to what they kind of perceived as like a kind of a small problem. But for me, it was a bigger problem, and I knew it needed to change. So I I called Tim back and I said, "Yeah, like what's this look like? You know, what do you think?" And he's like, "Well, Jenny is an amazing sewer. She's been sewing since she was 4 years old. 4-H, can sew anything you put in front of her, but she has not a concept at all about like how it all works. You know, like how you would use backpacking gear, like, performance aspects of it, just all of those kind of pieces. He's like, I think we can get your sewing chops up working with Jenny. And I think that you can add a lot to the conversation about just like what it would take to make good outdoor products. And I was like, all right, I'm a tentative yes. I got to understand like what this is going to cost me because I knew it would cost me something. And he's like, well, yeah, I mean, we have, where do you want me to start? We have no 401k. We have no health insurance. You would start at probably like 13 or 14 bucks an hour. You'd be back on a time clock. It was like, he's like, but you'd be making cool gear on a company that could go places. And, you know, you're going to have to decide if that's the trade off that you're looking for, basically. So, yeah, I went home. I thought about it. I said, give me a week to just kind of like crunch some numbers and like understand what this is going to be like. And like I messaged him back about a week later and I said, dude, I'm in. I'm ready to do this thing. Like if you're ready to do this and it's real, I'll do it. And I can't say that I'm going to give it forever, but I'll give it some time because I feel like I'd regret it immensely if I didn't try. And so, yeah, I went, I got my ass kicked, on the sewing floor. Like it was a mix of, learning new things, like and being involved in the production side because they just had no capacity. They needed stuff. So I'm learning how to sew synthetic hoods and mitts and booties. And I'm guidelining zippers on, I'm vaseline quilts, I'm top stitching, I'm learning how to cut on cutting tables. It was like fire hose drinking to a level that I had not experienced in a long time. But every day I came home and I was just like, hell yeah. Like that was so cool. Like I got to do this, and this. And it was being noticed by the couple people, at Enlightened Equipment that at that point the infrastructure was microscopic. It was like Tim, there was a CFO, Andy, that basically ran HR, logistics, facilities, finances. Like he was all of those things. We had a production manager, and then after that, it was pretty much just like tons of sewers.
When you say
And
tons,
so
like
I
how many
started.
sewers is that?
I mean, at the time, I think there was about 40 sewers.
Whoa. Okay.
Um, yeah, and it was like this mission of hire anybody that with a pulse. Like we'll train them to sew. We need people because when I started in April of 2016, we had 16-week lead times on custom orders and just bins and bins and bins full of orders that needed to be the full way through. And we were not sophisticated at all. We had tabletop TL 2000 or TL 2000 sewing machines. We had stuffing systems that were made out of improvised leaf blowers. I mean, it was just absolute chaos, and I was just thriving in it. I just loved it so much. Um, but yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. And I mean, there's a lot of between then and now, of course, but it's been the most epic ride possible. I and
Amazing.
I yeah, I'm so happy I made it's the biggest risk. I'm very risk averse actually. Um, which what makes Tim and I a great combo because he's a roll the dice guy every day and I'm a pump the brakes kind of guy every day. So it was like in hindsight, I think it was probably one of the riskiest things I've ever done in my life, but absolutely the most gratifying.
Amazing story. What stands out to me about that is it's really like taking an entrepreneurial risk. It's like in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, this is, I'm sure there's a lot of founders listening to this who's like, "Well, that's exactly what it felt like for me to go start my own business." Yours is a little bit different because you were kind of joining another, you're kind of linking up with another entrepreneur, but very much a very similar math was going on in your head of like,
Yeah.
again, to the risk, like, what is this going to do to my family? I'm leaving all these things behind. Um,
Right.
at any point, I mean, it sounds like you were super excited every day you're coming back from work. Was there at any point during the first month, 6 months, year that you were like, what have I done? Second guessing, or were
Yes.
you all in from the beginning?
All in, yes, but second guessing, yes.
Okay.
Definitely took took a little bit of a beating on the finances for a while, kind of went into kind of full clammed up mode to kind of make it all work. And that was, April of 2016. My wife actually lost her job on June of 2016. It was a grant funded organization. She works in early childhood. She's like an inspiration that way. She's one that actually does go to school and has pursued her lifelong ambitions of being in this career her entire time. I have a criminal justice degree. My first no interview to a conservation warden, I was like, out of that, who cares? She just drives, and like she's really done well for herself. But a grant run out, she lost her job in June, and now we're down to my $14 an hour job and on her unemployment, and it was terrifying. It was like a very, very scary thing. I actually interviewed during that time for a job here at the state WSU college. I took an interview because a guy that was in my network from my fundraising days. He was the foundation director. He needed somebody. He knew me. He called me. Thought I was still at Southeast Tech. I told him what was going on. Said he had this great opportunity for me. I went and I interviewed. He offered me the job. And I don't even in my this the first time. I won't redact it. I promise. I don't care. But I thought about it real hard. I
Yeah.
really did. It would have been kind of just back to where I was pay wise. I think it might have even been a little bit more. It was with a bigger school. It was a really good opportunity at face value. Uh, and that was maybe even a harder decision than when I came to Enlightened Equipment in the first place, was staying at Enlightened Equipment that July. But man, ultimately, I couldn't make myself go do that again. I just it was like I would say it was like a PTSD kind of feeling, just putting myself back in that, like, just hustling for contributions and fundraising dinners and spiels in front of, hundreds of people, and just kind of constantly asking for money, constantly like painting fences that, like, the second you got done, you were back to painting the first panel again. It was just like a never ending perpetual stay alive cycle that felt like, to me, it would have saved me in the moment, but in the long run, it would have killed me.
Sure.
And I kind of just said no. Like, I'm pushing this. I was getting like some telegraphing from Tim that, like, he liked what I was doing, that things were growing, and I just kind of had faith that it would work out, and of course it did.
It's interesting. This you gave the I love this idea of like painting fences and then going. You get to the end of the fence, you go back and start to paint to the same board or the first board again.
Yeah.
In my mind, I've dealt a little bit with in-house manufacturing, but in my mind, that is kind of what manufacturing looks like too. What is it? Like you got to do the same thing over and over again. Like, was it
it's
novel?
tr-
Was it what was the difference that made you say I don't like this fence, but I like that fence?
yeah, I mean, it is. I think it's actually true that, manufacturing, I think, does have a lot of, it's repetitious in a way, right? But I think the difference is that I always felt like here I could build something that was building on top of itself and could potentially, would eventually grow to a point that it felt like I would make headway, with donors and things like that. You're kind of back to the drawing board every year. There's a fresh slate. You got a new golf tournament. You got a new whatever. You get to keep some of that, but you're always kind of having to go back to the well. You're always having to try to, like, you never really feel like you're getting ahead. Like, I would say, like, whereas like an insurance agent, they paint the fence, they get that client. A lot of times they got them forever. They're just building a longer fence. It just goes on perpetually. And eventually you got this, 1,000-mile long fence. It was like, I'd paint like my fence on a yard, and then I'd come back and, like, it was like over it, over and
Sure.
over again. And like, we're here, I felt like I was positioned in a way that I had control about what we built, and I could build things that would last longer.
Right. Can you speed run me a little bit through the trajectory within the business that led you to CEO? Like just kind of give us the
Yeah, yeah.
over the top of like what
Yeah,
where you went from there.
absolutely. So, April 2016 started in R&D. Um, January of 2018, I started as a production coordinator. So it was kind of it was a salary role. It was like 40K or something, but then I could like start to get into some benefits and things like that. It was definitely a path into the operations side of the business.
So sorry,
So in that
you
role,
did like a year and a half basically on an hourly, just plugging away
yeah,
at hourly. Wow, good for you.
punching in, punching out, doing the whole thing, using PTO like everybody else, doing all the things, doing production stuff, like whatever they told me to do, I did. But in that time, I mean, man, it was so cool. Like we came out with the Torrid jacket during that time. We like perfected the Convert. We perfected the Enigma. Like one of the first big projects I had was like a pair of mittens that Tim had released and then end up basically recalling, refunding everybody because they were having all kinds of problems in the mittens and scaling on sizing. So Tim literally threw me a bin of mittens, like of all shapes and sizes. They were all like basically past fails. And he said, fix the mitten, and so I spent months, literally months, like making the stronghold mitten into a thing that was like cool and has basically been unchanged since, added the flip top to them. And but yeah, that's that like basically a year and a half. I was just straight up R&D with if there wasn't enough R&D stuff or whatever to do, I'd jump into production, sew down quilts, so synthetic products like wherever I could, stuff quilts, cut quilts, like anything basically. So did that for a year and a half. As things started to expand, when I started, I think we moved like one or two glass top, like 8 foot glass top cutting tables into this big production bay. uh, where we are now is almost perfectly in line with the date I started. They moved in March of 2016. I started here in April 2016. So we've been in this building about 10 years, but it's 50,000 square feet. It's got 3 massive production bays and a huge warehouse. So it was kind of a ghost town when I moved in. There was like 2 tables in bay one and 20,000 suite. There's a bunch of sewing things in bay two. And actually what we call bay three now is just unfinished warehouse space that we renovated since then. So I did kind of everything. And as we started to get bigger and needed to scale, we decided, okay, we're going to add like 6 or 7 glass top cutting tables. We're going to go from like 2 stuffing stations and hire like 8 people in stuffing. We were making all of our bags and straps and, little accessory things, everything was just getting done at that time. And so they needed somebody to kind of coordinate workflow, do inventory, basically keep people fed with work, troubleshoot stuff, make sure orders were in the right order, just basic manufacturer coordinating stuff. So I interviewed for that job. I got it, which was a very happy day for me. It felt, yeah, it felt very rewarding and it felt like I was, on the right track. And so that job, I oversaw all of stuffing, cutting, and sewing bags and straps, which included training people to sew bags and straps, which is hilarious because there's still people here that work here that I trained to sew bags and straps, which is very fun. Like I'll joke with like Ashley, who's like one of our specialists, like, hey, I showed you how to sew bags and straps. Just keep that in mind, that kind of thing. Um, so I did that. That was about that was about a year that I did that. And then our production manager at the time left to go. He had an engineering degree. Yeah, he moved on to do something different. And there was no interview process for that next thing. Tim just pulled me in and said, hey, we got a couple people doing these coordinator jobs. I don't want to interview this job. I just want you to have it. Will you accept it? I think no one's going to argue that you're the right person for this at this point. I just think I want to work with you on this. And I was like, wow. And I'm like, when? And he's like, in like a week or two, I would need you to do that. And so, of course, I took that. And then that put me over, my old role, the down role of the same nature. And then, all of production. I was in charge of all of managing the flow of production at that point, which was just wild at that time because we were working off the spreadsheets. I helped implement like a shop floor control system where we're entering all the operations and times and, different products and assigning it to locations and like just building like the infrastructure of an actual manufacturing facility. So yeah, we did that. We started to bring on some automated machines, big commercial stuffing machines, Zund CAD cut machines for, shells and liners, all that kind of stuff. Brought in a laser. Um, and as I started to kind of perfect that, we were lacking heavily on the admin side. There was still at that time, it was basically just Tim and Andy. And Andy had a bunch of hats he was wearing, and he was, he's not an accountant by nature. He's not a logistics expert by nature, and it was starting to inundate him, and Tim was wanting to split that role apart a little bit into an operations officer role. And so, um, we did, he basically just broke Andy's role into two, and I took half of it, and Andy took half of it. And so just kind of moved into that role, did that for a couple years. I think more than anything, I think Tim was just trying to acknowledge what I was doing, but it didn't really change the nature of my job. But he made me the chief operating officer, and we started to build in infrastructure underneath. We hired in an actual, CPA to be our finance director. We added in HR people. We added in specific logistics people, and Tim is like a highly creative guy. Like he's not a day to day guy. Like you work with the owner founders a lot. Like he was finding himself doing jobs that he hated. It was just stuff he didn't want to do. It wasn't why he did the business in the first place. He just wanted to keep R&D going. He kind of wanted just like quality control stuff and really like put his stamp of approval on a lot of things, just kind of keep growing the business. And so, we started him and I just kind of started to talk like, well, what is the next step look like for you, Tim? Like, how do you get away from some of these heartaches that you're having every day? And he's like, I just think I need a CEO. And, at that time, he wasn't pinpointed on me. He was kind of like at the rate we were scaling, he was kind of, I think there was a little bit of trepidation on like, do we need to like go hire like a guy,
A
outside of here to
pro.
kind of help us? Yeah, like a pro. Exactly. And like, I never pushed it. It's like not, I'm honestly like, to be honest, I hate talking about myself. This is not a thing I do. Like, I'm not braggadocious. I'm very humble. I never really insisted I could be the guy. I didn't even 100% know if I could. But I basically just said that if that is what he wanted to pursue with bringing an outside person in, I would toe the line. I would teach him everything I knew. I would help in any way possible. Um, we kind of sat with that for about a year or so. And then, things were kind of going well. And he said, I've thought a lot about this. I think bringing another guy in to be your boss would be the dumbest thing I ever did. And I think we need to get you in this seat, man. Like, I think that's what we got to do next. Like, let's figure this out.
How long ago was that?
That's kind of how we got there. That was 2 years ago.
Okay. So what's the size of the business now? And I'm curious what the size of the business when you joined.
Yeah. So when I joined, I think we were about 40 people, kind of all in. But it was very light on admin. It was just a few people in the office, and the rest were pretty much sewers. We're not so much bigger now, because we've infused a lot of technology in places that we had a lot of hands.
Efficiency.
You know, we Yeah, just efficiency. We had 8 glass top cutting tables that anytime somebody ordered a regular revelation, you're grabbing a wooden template off the wall, rolling out fabric, putting that thing on the fabric, marking all the baffle lines with chalk pens, cutting it all out with a hot knife. Everything was incredibly manual. And so, you know, basically 8 cutters turned into like one cutter on a Zune G3 that you basically can nest. And you're cutting everything that's in red tendy in one big job, and it takes you 30 minutes instead of days. Stuffers were We had 8 or 9 stuffers that literally were sucking down out of a barrel that was on a scale using a whiteboard to mark off how many grams went into certain baffles that were powered by leaf blowers in an attic. You couldn't go up there without ear pro because there would be like 16 or 20 leaf blowers going at one time. I'd be having to go up there every day to switching breakers because we'd be blowing breakers up there. It was wild. So we invested in a Groff 3 bin, 15-foot tall uh, stuffing machine that you're scanning a QR code, and it's just you're stomping on a pedal and it's auto filling, 3 different scales at a time, blowing down exactly, within seconds that would have taken, you know, many, many minutes before. So there's been a lot of efficiency improved. Old tabletop sewing machines turned into commercial, 9000C, all digital machines that we can push through, certain sewing settings to different machines at any given time. So they can it's so much more modular, so much more efficient. People were taking forever. There was no real standards on how fast you could move. It was just like, well, try to do 8 quilts a day. That was like the MO at first, where now like you scan into baffle a revelation, it sets a time up on a timer and it says, okay, you got 60 minutes to do this. And on either side of that, it's not necessarily good or bad, but it's a tool to kind of keep people at a certain pace and cadence so that you can actually predict capacity. Where before it was like, well, I don't know, she sews like this, she sews like that, he sews like that. It was just impossible to actually really predict what you could do in a given week. So to answer your question, we're at 73 employees right now.
Okay, well, that's still almost double. you
Well,
know.
yeah, but during COVID, during 2021, we had 114.
Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting because that was my next question, or where I wanted this to go is, so the efficiency of Enlightened equipment, obviously making good hire to make good choices in who he hired and finding you. I mean, honestly, it kind of sounds like you just found. I don't know who won better, you or Tim. It's like you got your dream job in a lot of ways, and he got his dream employee in a lot of ways. So it's an amazing
Yeah,
matchmake right there. So
absolutely.
Enlightened equipment is kind of going through this efficiency rise. The company's growing; it's getting more efficient. I'd imagine everything's kind of working while simultaneously the ultralight boom is beginning to build. So, like,
Yeah.
are you, if you were to overlay the growth of Enlightened, does it match exactly kind of the growth of ultralight, or did you grow before that? Like, how does that work? I mean, I know ultra gauging an entire industry is hard, but you would know better than anybody what that sizes look like.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's similar. I think that the industry has expanded a lot from the core audience that might have been, absolutely like gram counter through hikers. Like it's clearly beyond that now. We know like definitely still a core part of our audience. And like we never want to forget that is our origin story truly. But ultralight just benefits really anybody in the backcountry, like from young to old. I mean, it doesn't have to be the mindset that, I got to come into with a 15-pound pack and all of that. Like that is the origin story for sure of Enlightened equipment. That was the core audience for sure. But as ultralight has expanded more into mainstream, into lifestyle, even at this point, um, like that really, I think it made the pie bigger for everybody. So even though there was a lot more businesses coming to the table to support the industry, I think the audience was also exponentially growing at that time. And so I don't really think like anybody was unfed. I think if they really wanted to grow and be in that world, I think it was out there for them to take it. We've had if anything, like we've kind of tempered down a little bit over the years. Like we were a core 100% custom only model for a while. That was just not sustainable. we're from Winona is 30,000 people, highly manufacture sector where, we're competing, we're all of us manufacturers, from Fortune 500s like Fastenal to Peerless Chain, smaller manufacturers that are still, have a huge audience like Winona Canoe. I mean, we're all competing for the same workforce effectively. And so we really, that there's a limiting factor, especially not being a Fastenal, not offering like kick-ass, 401ks and awesome vacation packages and things. Like we had to really differentiate ourselves in a lot of like, I guess they're tangibles, but intangible ways to, I think, make it attractive to even have a core group of people that could sustain, the even a smaller number of quilts than at one point we were making. We were highly inefficient during COVID because we literally set up our IT room as a classroom, and we're training 8 people from zero experience to sew, to trying to sew some of the most complicated, fragile premium materials with high customer expectations on the market. That is a slow pivot from no sewing experience to sewing boutique manufacturing that's not automated, that's very craftsman oriented, it's very hands-on. um it was miserable, to be honest, for everyone. Like it was a lot of hard days, a lot of frustration, a lot of inefficiency. And even during that period, just a lot of mistakes. We grew too fast. We did dumb things. We bought dumb things. We were just trying to patch in and anything that we possibly could to kind of make it less painful. But as the COVID kind of bubble kind of burst on the outdoor industry, we were ready to calm it down anyway. It had been just an insane, 2021 was our best year ever.
Sure.
Um, and I don't have high ambitions to try to get back to 2021 levels. It was just really tough.
You said that you made the switch from doing custom to holding inventory. When did that change happen? And then what is the percentage of the business that's inventory versus at once or custom?
Yeah. So, man, we kind of, there's a little bit of luck involved in some of this too, because we had been toying with the idea of importing shell inventory of just 3 sizes and 4 temps of revelations for a long time. Even from like when I first started, there was hubbub about like, well, maybe we need to figure out some part of this being made overseas, because like we're never going to be able to meet a scale with custom sewing that would allow the business to kind of get to the level that we wanted it to be. And so that really feet got dragged on that for years. There was a lot of internal resistance again with it too. There's politicking involved, and we have a great team that are like highly invested in the company and like the philosophy and like what we do. And so the idea even of outsourcing anything was kind of dead on arrival for a lot of people. And I was probably in that camp, to be honest, for a while. But as I started to get more into the operation side, it started to make sense to me more and more and more. It was like, wow, I mean, if, unless we are willing to tolerate and effectively infinity lead times, or like actually turning off the sales of products at certain times of the year, there is no working our way out of this. We couldn't hire, train, and manufacture our way, to growth. The math was not mathing. And at first I just wasn't privy to that math. But as I started to understand it, it basically came down to, are we cool being this size forever effectively? But if we want to get to this size, if we really want to have a shot at, being able to do wholesale and having our stuff in like outfitters along trails, like these were all dreams that we had, we're saying them out loud. Like, how cool would it be if we could have all of our quilts, at every cool little outfitter along the PCT and the AT? And we're like, yeah, it'd be super cool, but it's not. We might as well just, keep daydreaming, because it's never going to happen. Like we could never build any stock to actually have ready to ship things. Anytime we did, it would be gone instantly. And it was frivolous. So we actually engaged, we did a lot of homework. We engaged a manufacturer that is, made high-end sleeping bags in China, and we started that process in mid 2018, kind of just getting all of the OEM connections together. The core was we wanted it to be every component, every stitch, everything completely OEM to what our team could do. And that was a arduous process that went back and forth and back and forth. And we could substitute this. No, we don't want you to substitute that. We want this. And oh, well, it's going to take longer to get that. It's going to cost more to do that. Yeah, we get it. Like, let's get on the same page. You guys are making what we're making. You're just making it across the globe. We finally got there. We got our first PO put in for, I think it was like 1,000 revelations in sometime in, let's see, it would have been, man, it all kind of blends together at a certain point. But basically how the timeline played out is we got shut down for COVID through the state of Minnesota, said, hey, non-essentials got to go home. We were gone for 4 or 5 weeks. We had effectively no revenue during that period of time. It was kind of feeling doom and gloomy. Thankfully we were able to get some help from the rescue funds that were kind of out there for small businesses and SBA, and we got some pauses on our mortgage. We got some stuff that kind of helped us like limp along for a couple months, because like cash flow when you're little like that, I mean, even shit like when you get bigger, cash flow is still just the challenge. It's always the challenge. You're always weighing that against what you want to do versus what you can do, and not overextend and leaving buffers. And so it was really it was scary. It kind of felt like that could be the end, to be honest. But we got a notification that China was going to be back, kind of coming back online during, as COVID was kind of in the midst of it, and it was going to be limited capacity, but they might have our POs at some point. And basically the day that we were able to come back, like we got green lit to come back and start manufacturing again, which was just so like, like to think about it again actually gives me a little bit of like PTSD. But like we were here the whole time, like installing plexiglass screens in between all the workstations and hand sanitizing stations, and like doing all that stuff that everybody had to do, right? Trying to distance workstations and all that kind of stuff. So we're like in here doing work, not getting paid. We're all like on unemployment basically. But we got basically the day we got back, we got a notification that we were going to be receiving FedEx parcel, and it was the 1,000 quilts from our manufacturer. And so even though we had quite a number of staff that just didn't return, or whatever, we had this 1,000 revelations that we could stuff and we could sell. So we quick built a stock ready to ship product page. We put them up, and nobody else really had inventory. Like their capacity was way down. And like, because we had just done this kind of luckily in advance, it was kind of just sitting there waiting for us. We activated the thing and they just went, they just were like poof, within the first few days we got on, we ordered more. And really, yeah, we've been kind of leaning into that model ever since, at least on models that we want to be able to have ready to ship, so they all come here in a shelf form. We still got to stuff them, close them, distribute them, inspect them, ship them. But as far from a sewing stand,
So
yeah,
they're sewing shells and you're filling.
yes.
Oh,
So
okay.
we still wanted to like be able to put our hands on everything, see everything. We never felt, for a bunch of reasons, we didn't really want them to be stuffed and come to us. Like we wanted to have the option to see them. Also, like you start to stuff things, you have a lot more money into that product, every single product that's just potentially just sitting in the warehouse. So shells allowed us to just, somebody orders a ready to ship item, thing triggers in our system. We pull the shell out of inventory, stuff it according to their schedule, close it up, distribute it out the door. So it's a little bit of a lag. We call it internally stuff on demand, but it's basically a shell model that allows us to kind of keep our most valuable commodity down as flexible as possible. So yeah, and so Revelation shells. We eventually moved into some Enigma shells in a couple colors. We have one convert shell, um, and then some of the synthetic apparel. We've moved to Vietnam to have some ready to ship items too, just because apparel items are notoriously time consuming capacity sponges, and they're also extremely difficult to train on and just get just right. So yeah, we've kind of worked to have we to keep both models. It's important to us that we have, on the site, you can grab custom, you can grab ready to ship, and it's kind of just whether it's your values or your needs or what have you, there's an option there, I think, for kind of whoever.
Okay. Um, how do I phrase this? The ultralight community is got a little bit of a reputation for being keyboard warriors. So I'm wondering if you had
Yeah,
any feedback from the community when you were like, "Hey, everything's made in Winona," to yeah, it's this is the new
some of it.
paradigm.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
was there any, because that is a big thing. I was just meeting with an entrepreneur yesterday making this very decision. Everything they make is domestic right now, and they really need to think about making it overseas for cost and
Yeah.
efficiencies. This is a struggle for founders. It's like, hey, man, I've been known as the made in USA guy or the made in Canada company. What was that like for
Mhm.
you as a company and a brand to shift like that? And, what were the haters like?
They were present and they were definitely out in force. I think at that point in time, I was still primarily in I was still in the production side of it. So I didn't necessarily have to field each one of those kind of questions that were coming through. But it was a hurdle we knew we would face. Like if we were gonna do this, this was gonna be something that we were gonna have to work through. Everybody was gonna have to prepare for, the backlash that would exist there. And the I think the thing that was like hard for all of us is we understood why the backlash was there. It wasn't like we were just like, screw you guys, like we're doing what we want to do. It's like, well, no, like we get it. Like like there was a lot of us internally that also didn't, I guess, love the idea, but we understood that it was kind of a necessary thing to go through. But on the same hand, like the other side of that coin was we were getting blown up all the time for having super long lead times and
Yeah.
not being able to like ship things on time and actually get stuff to people when they need it, or like don't even bother with those guys because you're gonna have to wait 4 months to get your thing, which was the reality. And so I don't know. I think there's a lot of points in time that I've learned through this job that you kind of have to kind of close things off a little bit and really think about what is best for the brand, and really, like, when I say the brand, it's for our team. Like what is the thing that is going to kind of keep us around the longest, that's going to make us the most relevant, that's going to serve the most customers, that's going to keep our people employed. And I honestly think a custom only model would have held back what our sewers and our office folks would have been able to earn from like a revenue standpoint. It would have held off on like the benefits that we would have been able to provide our team. And so I think a lot of us were able to kind of compartmentalize these things and say, hey, ready to ship, getting better margins on these things, and being able to actually sell them, it allows us to have cash flow, and it allows us to have more breathing space around custom. It allows us to not feel like we live or die by custom and lead time. And, um, and it offsets some of the poor margins that you get from, domestic, manufacturing, like it just is more money to make it here. So it for us, it was kind of like, well, you get better margins here and you get a little worse margins here, and then maybe you meet in a spot that actually is sustainable. And so we just kind of, we heard it. We definitely had, lots of customer service tickets. We had macros to address concerns and tell people where things were made. And, we vetted the manufacturer for fair labor. And so we were able to like give them those pieces. But at the end of the day, I'm sure we lost some customers from that. Like that's a reality that I think any entrepreneur that's thinking about, especially if they are very made in America oriented. I think that feels like a harder thing to step back from if you really are, in that kind of mindset. We were never super like that, like that wasn't the main pride point that we had. It was just we make good stuff. It's very light. It's accessible. It's pretty easy to kind of understand how it all works, and it's tried and tested stuff. So yeah, I think if Made in America is your model, then I can see how that would be incredibly hard to walk back.
Yeah, that people are, that's a very hard flag to take down after you've planted it. Yeah,
Yeah,
I totally understand that. I mean, I think there's also something that we need to remember is that, especially in outdoor soft goods, making it overseas is like they're the best at it. Like they are the best.
100%. It's a thing that is kind of painful to me at times, is that like when we send over something like our Torrid jacket, our team is fantastic. We've had a lot of the same people making Torrid jackets for years. But at the scale, uh, the quality is it's incredible. Like it actually hurts my soul that other factories can make our things better than us.
Okay.
But the reality is that's what they do day in and day out and have for multi generations.
Oh yeah.
This is their world. We're just living in it, pretending almost.
Right. No kidding. Out of curiosity, because you're bringing in shells, I mean, this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but I'm just curious because you're bringing in shells and not a finished good. Um, can you, do the tariffs, did you get to sneak through the tariffs a little bit because it's not a finished good? No, you're still getting hit with them.
No, no, tariffs are present in all aspects of what we do
Okay.
effectively. I
Okay.
mean, there is essentially nothing that is not impacted in most outdoor brands by tariffs at this point.
Oh yeah.
Down is a primary one. Like down that is commercially available for the outdoor space is 80 to 90%, depending on like what numbers you trust, sourced from the meat industry in China. And so it's all kind of coming through China, and even to the extent that there's like European downs available, like you have to have some trust in that, because I think there's back channel ways that things are getting shifted around. It's down is a product of China that is a commodity that cannot be replicated basically anywhere else in the world.
Interesting. I want to come,
And
go
it,
ahead.
and it, yeah, yeah, and it just has so many factors that are involved. Like the price of pork can greatly impact the price of down. The pork price down price goes up. It's the way that they gravitate in their diet, and it's you have some swine flu and pork price goes up. They shift to poultry, and all of a sudden you'll see down prices. There'll be a kind of a glut of it on the market, but it's a fascinating commodity that is yeah, it's wildly speculative. It's really unpredictable, especially when you get into real high fill power downs. So, yeah, our down price, just to give you like a sense of it, like a year ago, from like a year and a half ago, um, we're almost double for our 950 per pound down price,
Because
which
of
is
tariffs or because of the market in general?
both,
Wow.
both.
Wow. And
Hmm.
how much, uh, in correlation, how much have you had to adjust your price? And I know we're not going to
Last
talk about
year,
pricing.
yeah,
Nobody wants to
no,
talk about pricing, but this is the only question I have
no,
about
yeah,
pricing.
no, that's okay. Pricing, like for me, like pricing and cost of goods and margins is just pretty much the least fun part of my job. It's like
Yeah.
it is a huge part of the job, and it's a thing that you have to kind of have forever vigilance about. But it's just it's so dull. It's not exciting to me at all. It's just painful a lot of
Yeah.
times, and everything just keeps going up and up and up. Remind me of the
Okay. So
question.
I was just
Sorry.
curious. So your down price has effectively doubled.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah.
So
Pricing
what
increase.
has
So
your
yeah,
product price gone up? A little bit? A lot?
we did. So right after the tariffs were announced, it had such an impact on 950 fill power that last year we made a 950 down product only price increase of like 5%. But this year we have raised all down products 8%. And that is honestly not even enough.
That's- I mean, yeah, when something doubles and you raise it 8% to compensate, that doesn't really cover it. So
Yeah,
I hear you. I'm
no.
I'm curious because I want to come back to the team, like you as CEO running the team. I'm really curious about getting back into that. But now we're on this topic of down. It's probably a good time to jump into this idea of down versus synthetic from a performance standard. I think is an interesting conversation, but also from a supply chain perspective.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about because you're making both, and Enlightened is kind of
Yeah, yeah.
known for both. So like, tell me how you think about them.
Man, I would love it if synthetic could get to the stage of performance of down. That would be incredible. Because there are so many fills out on the synthetic side that are, highly recyclable. It's effectively could potentially be an infinite supply. Uh, but in a product that could be infinitely recycled, but it's just not even close to there for performance wise. You're dealing with like the best synthetics in the world are probably the equivalent of like a 550 fill power down or maybe a 600 fill power down. And it's basically been stuck there for about a decade. Made marginal improvements. Like there's a new product out. It's called Primaloft Thermal Plume. It's a blowable synthetic that has a lot of really interesting features. It's highly sustainable. We're actually going to be getting some in the office just to like mess around with our shells. But understanding that at a 550 fill power equivalent, we're going to have to add 30 to 40% more of that material in a shell to achieve the same warmth and loft. So the weight is going to go up significantly, and so will compressibility. And that's really ultimately where synthetic, from like a pure loft performance standpoint, falls apart. Like as you get into the high fill power options and just compressibility and warmth through weight at about 550 fill power, down just starts to absolutely decimate synthetic options. It's really not even close. And truly, I don't think in my lifetime we'll see it achieve it. I really don't. I think something absolutely new and completely innovative would have to happen. That like some of the most premium synthetic makers in the world that have been doing this for 40 years have still not really made a whole lot of advancement. Form factor, absolutely. Like Climate Shield's very cool. Like it comes on a sheet. It only requires edge stabilization. So you don't have to have all of your quilting lines and pockets and things like that to kind of keep it from drooping. It will essentially just stay put with just being sewed around the edge. And its warm to weight ratio is incredibly high. But it's so noticeable when you build a synthetic quilt for like 30 or 20 degrees versus a 20 or 30-degree down quilt. It's 2 to 3 times the volume and quite a bit noticeably heavier. Um, so it's just, I think that we're just up against that technology hurdle. Like something really interesting is going to happen, or some kind of new material is going to have to basically be invented, I think, to kind of push that to the next level. But synthetic is freaking unbelievable in ways that down will really struggle. It's far more washable. It can be far more sustainable. A lot of insulations are 100% virgin polyester. Not great. Can be recycled, but there are we've figured out amazing things to do with that. We have like big companies in town like RTP that pelletize plastic. Like we take all of our Climate Shield scraps and they've gone to RTP, they regrind, repelletize it, and they turn it in. So we're not putting, huge roll-offs full of Climate Shield into the landfill anymore. That was just hurting our soul too much. But as you start to get into um, some of the polyethylene, polypropylene blends. Now you're starting to get into a world where you could see, forever renewable synthetics, as long as we had end of life programs that people weren't just being like, oh, it's beat up, throw it in the garbage, get another one. I think that if we can, man, if we can figure that out, that would be incredible. But they wash so well. They handle like perspiration and moisture so much better than down. I mean, the idea of like treated down is kind of a misnomer, to be honest. Like we started with Down Tech, which was, a DWR treated down. And as much as they'll tell you that it doesn't affect the loft, it doesn't affect certain things, it does. Like it clings together so much more. We would typically do, we regularly do independent lab tests at IDFL to test our supplier to make sure what we're getting is is actually what we're buying. And we were finding, 100 fill power or more loss on the treated downs versus the untreated downs. Also at that time, like you're dealing with PFAS and PFC stuff. So like we moved to untreated down and we were able to like get so much more loft, so much more predictability. But again, like the trade-off is moisture control. It's gonna struggle that way unless you're careful. Shells and liners can do a really good job with their DWRs at kind of keeping big splash events, things like that off you. But like on apparel, you're just pushing infinity amounts of moisture through your body. And if that's directly into a down jacket, uh, that's gonna affect their performance. I've had many down jackets over the years, and I've always eventually had problems where they start to get real droopy in the baffles. They start to get real thin where they don't really feel like they're poofing out anymore. And it's getting harder, it's hard to restore that. But that said, that side of the technology has improved a lot too. There's very cool companies out there. There's a company called eClean that uses liquid CO2 to clean and restore loft and down. It's a waterless system that basically is it's an enclosed system, so you're not actually shedding microplastics and things like that. I plug eClean all the time. Like we have done a bunch of independent tests with them. Uh, they're fantastic for restoring loft and just sanitizing a quilt. We've had tons of customers like my quilt's dead, and we'll get them in touch with eClean, and they'll be like blown away at how good it
You
can
can just ship your
restore it.
product to them and they do it for you and ship it back.
Yeah, it's like so hands off. You go on their website, you say kind of, is it a jacket, is it a sleeping bag or whatever? You pay, it's like 60 or $70. They send you a shipping label, you put it in a box, you send it to them, they send it back, boom, done.
How often are
No
people
more
needing to do this?
bathtubs. It depends on use.
Sure.
Like we get some stuff in here that should have been cleaned a lot much earlier than it has been. I mean, but I think if you're like a weekend warrior type that goes a few times a year, you're doing a week in the Boundary Waters or, a couple weekends, like you probably you could go a long time without cleaning a down product. But if you're a through hiker and you've got a through hike under your belt, it's probably
Time.
time. Like
Yeah,
there's
sure.
probably a lot of grime in there.
Sure. 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 eClean. Okay, cool. I'm going to link to that. And I've never heard of it. So that's very cool. I'm
It's
curious to
very
go
cool.
back to this idea of, yeah, the team. It's not often that you have a CEO and you know, still considered a small company, though. Anytime a team's over 15, I don't think it's small anymore. Things start to
Yeah.
change. You're in the 70s employee wise, and you're running this, and it's rare to have somebody who's not the founder move into the CEO role, but you started essentially, let's call it at the bottom. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
punching the
Yeah.
clock and moving up. And
$100.
now you're running the team, and you've got these people that you're working with, and you know intimately, like you said, I taught you how to sew that. You know what it's like.
Yeah.
What's it like now for you in your CEO role, and how are you empowering team members? Like, what are you doing? What have you brought kind of from the trenches up to the top that you are now implementing to like essentially make the business better, but also make your job easier?
Yeah. I mean, great question and multifaceted for sure. I mean, I think honestly, like my trajectory is what allowed me to be the CEO that I am. I think that everybody here knows that I started as a sewer. Like they basically get that at one point I was them, and that I've felt the trials and tribulations. I know where all the skeletons are buried here. I know pretty much the like everything but the first year or two, which was I'm sad I missed, because I think that that would have been a whole nother level of chaos that would have been fun to navigate. But I think that, like, I get that credibility factor, I guess, because I wasn't the outside guy that they brought on. I mean, we have tried that, in roles that were, you know, like a production director role or things like that, where we've tried to bring in somebody that on paper, they've absolutely crushed their craft in another business or something like that. And they seem like they check every single box, but they get here and they're hard. They just can't relate to the type of work that we do, and like we don't fit in this nice little box. You're not picking a SKU out of a box and packaging it and sending it. You're not welding something from a schematic. It's what we do has a lot of, like, there's vagaries around it, and there's a lot of, like, um just gut feelings at times, like, is this pass fail? Is this, like, are we going to be able to advance this? It's not so binary that you just can look at something and know, like, well, this is how you fix this, and da 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 da. And, like, as we brought in some people, in those kind of higher level production roles, it was really hard for them. And I think it would have been hard for me too. I empathized with them. I talked with them a lot about how, like, I get it. Like, this is a lot to try to just understand every little moving part here and how it all works together. And, like, why the production travelers, if it's this, has to go this way, or if it's this, it has to go this way. And um it just I think it really revealed to me, like, how valuable it was that I started at the bottom and I got to have a kind of a taste of everything along the way, because I can go to effectively anybody in the building, and I can relate with what they're dealing with. I can have a war story that I can share. I can tell them maybe some perspective about how it used to be versus, how it is now, and why it might be had been better before, or why it might be better now. There's a lot of value in that, I think, and I think that Tim, our owner, is very much the same way. He started sewing in his basement. So and he still does sew sometimes. Like, he'll still hop on a machine and sew some things, usually for fun, usually something for him personally, or a buddy. It's not like production related. There's no pressure. There's no standard. He just is like R&D and stuff. He's messing around with things. But I think that that gives Tim a lot of credit too with our team. Like, they know, like, hey, this dude did all this. Like, he had the single leaf blower thing in the basement of his house. Like, that's really where it started. Was the basement of his house was converted into a very, very small scale production, where we were even shipping some of the cut shells off to other people's houses, and they were like sewing them like a sewing club almost. So I think, like, fundamentally, that's the foundation that I get to stand on. And I really appreciate it now. I think that, man, in like a dream state, it's just like, boom, bada bing, bada boom, you're the CEO. Like, how awesome is that? I think I would have hated that. I think it would have taken away so much of what I can offer here, because when they have a grievance or a problem about, like, shop floor control, our production thing, I can be like, well, hey, have you tried this? Have can is that, that's maybe not so big of a quality thing. Can we make that a quality thing that's like um one that doesn't actually hit their quality score, a no measure quality score. And, oh yeah, that's a good idea, because it's just like a couple little threads. Like, we don't want to ding them so hard for that, but that's a good way to record it. Like, these are all these little granular details of just things I've picked up throughout this whole process, allow me to, like, effectively contribute to every conversation, which is, I think, my leadership style in a nutshell. I am the sole administrator outside of Tim. It's me, it's CEO, and then it's we have a finance director, but she's very honed in on the finance side of the business. And then after that, it's managers. And so I meet with every single manager and director in the building. I am their sole go-to. And so that has meant a lot of changes for me. Like, I used to be a very doer guy. I would be in shop floor building all the stuff. And now I have to like empower them, train them, and like, teach a person to fish kind of thing so that I don't have to do it. Like I tried that for a while. I tried to do, all of this, the guidance and the support and the leadership and have this big plate of things to do. And I was just letting people down. I just couldn't get things done. And um I hated that. So I had to really kind of work to pivot into a role where I empowered my managers and directors to have a lot more autonomy, to not be so tightly controlled around every aspect of everything, like understanding that like sometimes like good is good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to even be exactly how I envision it. It just has to be in the spirit of what I'm trying to achieve. And man, like that has been a massive cultural shift within our building. It was very siloed up when I first got here. It was like people would get in trouble almost for like collaborating, talking in doorways. Like, don't you got other stuff to do? Like, like needs to get done. And now there's like so much blending because everything we do just blends into the next person's role. The changes on big commerce affect, customer service, affects the integration to ship station, affects how we order raw goods. Like it all just kind of blends together. And so there's a lot more of me, directing like, hey, you need to go talk to Andrew about this because he's our expert here. He's the guy that can help you get some answers, and I'll be sure to jump in if you need me to. I can connect a lot of the dots and kind of I'm more doing the orchestra, like that as opposed to like being the put it all on my back guy and I'll just like, get it done. Like that was destined to fail. I mean, it was actively failing. I had to pivot how I was doing things.
What helped you in that pivot? I mean, obviously you had the self-awareness to recognize that something needed to change, but it's one thing to recognize that something needs to change, and it's a totally other thing to
Yeah.
actually make a change.
I think just being honest with my team about it, just kind of telling them like, hey, I'm failing you in this. You gave me this thing to do last week. I said that I would do it. I have not had time to do it. I want to do it. I desperately want to help do this. Um, but I think we have to kind of look at a way that I can assist this and not be the doer of this and really just really trying to like slowly teach them over time that like they don't need me to tell them every single thing they to do. They just don't. I think that there was levels of that had been kind of coached into a lot of our managers. Like my director or my like whatever will tell me what to do and then I go do. Well, that is all that is there are elements to that that I do have to just kind of like put my finger on the scale and say this here is what we're going to do and this is how I want it done and it has to be very honed in. It has to be exactly like I want it. But those things are few and far between these days. I can say, hey, we just did Grassroots Alliance show. We had we were undergunned in our product catalog. Colton and Jim and I went to the show and we're looking at all the other booths and they have these like beautiful bifold, catalogs that are just gorgeous. And we got a one pager, Parker, Scott, marketing guys, like what do you guys think? Like, what do you think we can do to like put Jim and Colton in a spot that can be equipped and get them to win and let them cook, let them go. Like, and most of the time I am blown away by like what they come up with. It's usually surpasses what I would have told them to do.
That's good growth, good awareness for you. Where do you want to be um, as a CEO and as a leader in the future? Pick, 2, 3, 5 years out from now. Like, where do you want to be? How do you want to grow? How do you want to change?
Man, I mean, that's a great question. Like I'm a very introspective, reflective person. And I do think about, regularly how I could have handled something better. I think that like looking out, I'm never like a 5-year plan guy. Like it just that idea has never really resonated with me. I'm very much, what can I change the next time I have something like this happen that has a better outcome than it did this time? And I just am far more a believer in just kind of continual quality improvements, just like, okay, that didn't go how I wanted it to go. You know, take the time to like think about what would have made it go better, and then just kind of continue to like just push those like slightly tweaked, modified versions of myself forward. Uh, and then, in 5 years when I zoom out, the chart's going to be here and I'm going to be here and I'm be like, wow, look at all this stuff I learned just from doing like little tiny things every day. I hope I'm here. I hope I'm here and can continue to have a lot of these guys on my team. But also, I really want to empower my team so that if they ever want to leave here, they will just dominate at whatever they want to go do next. That they will be so hireable because they have so many skills, because they are just, kick ass team players that like, I mean, there is nobody on my team that I would not put up against somebody in our space. I mean, they're just exceptional.
Amazing.
And a lot of it is just because they're just driven to like and empowered to do so, given more and more and more latitude. And, it's just, I don't know. I'll be 45 in May, so it's like I got a lot of growing to do. But if I look at my 35-year-old self that started here, it's like, I mean, it's wildly improved. I mean, it's come so far in the last 10 years. And it wasn't because I set some like goal. It was just because I really tried to be diligent and intentional in the day and in the moment to like think about, and not just me thinking about it. Like I'm like a very transparent person with my team. I get to know them like very well personally. I know I know all the kids' names. I know what's going on in their life. I don't hesitate at all to walk in and be like, "Well, that did not go great," and like, "I think I could have done better here." Like, how do what do you think? And they're like, "Yeah, we could have done this, we could have done that." Like, it's a culture of analyzing yourself without being hard on yourself.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, again, great self-awareness. I mean, I always say that self-awareness is the number one trait that entrepreneurs need to learn. And I would categorize you as an entrepreneur. I mean, you're very much in the entrepreneur seat in that way. I know Tim is still the owner, but you are running a very entrepreneurial business. So this conversation went all sorts of different places I didn't expect it to, and I'm really appreciative for it. The question that I always
Yeah,
end,
hopefully it's cool.
oh, it's great. The question I always end with is, how do you define success for yourself?
Mm. Man, it's not really work related, I don't think, unfortunately. I mean, I know that's kind of what we're
No, no, no.
talking about, but
I should say that it's not unfortunately because this is the point that we all own our own definition of success, and it's not one size fits all.
I think really ultimately is that like, it's kind of generic, I guess, but like friends, family, loved ones, like that I can do what I can do, I think to kind of be make them happy, like I like to see people around me happy, my team. Um, I think that's the greatest joy. I think really is just everything else really doesn't matter if you and your loved ones are not happy.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I agree. Well, I wish you more of that success in your life.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
this has been a pleasure, Chris. I really appreciate you. Yeah,
Absolutely.
telling the
My
story. It's
yeah,
it's wonderful.
likewise.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Good to
All right,
chat
man.
with you.
I'm gonna drop the all the links in the show notes for Enlightened Equipment and check out all the quality gear that they make. And yeah, I look forward
Cool.
to our next conversation.
Awesome, man. Take care. We'll see you down the road.